want to talk a little bit about my journey first of all, because I think this will contextualize what I'm going to talk about a little bit more as to why I believe that we should be zigging when others zag. So this is me. As you can see, I had a fantastic taste in sweaters when I was a little kid. And when I was a little kid, I was very lucky because I grew up being one of the first people to be able to have a computer at home. And this was my computer at home. So when I was 9, I got a VIC-20. That had an amazing 3.5K of RAM in it. 3.5K of RAM in it. I also loved the marketing campaign for the VIC-20. The VIC-20 was called the friendly computer, as if the computers would have been unfriendly at the time. And they even enlisted William Shatner to come in and say, this is the best computer value in the world today, the only computer you will need for years to come because it has 3.5K. Now with that 3.5K, this was my very first game. It was the very first game that I copied out of a magazine and ran that on the computer, and as you can see, it's hardly graphically intensive. That 3.5K was actually the end of a very, very long journey and the start of an even more impressive exponential rise. Because if you look at the average cost of a gigabyte of data storage over time, in 1980, which is around about the time I got my first computer, 1 gig of data cost $437,000, right? By 1990, that had fallen to $11,200. By 2000, to $11. By 2010, to 9 cents. To last year, 3 cents. Moore's law, as in the number of transistors on a chip double over time, processing power doubles over time, costs halve, bandwidth curved, all these exponential data allow us to be able to create fantastic games and fantastic experiences so that my son doesn't even know he's been born. When I show my son the games that I was playing at his age, he just looks at me and thinks, oh my God. I graduated then very quickly in 2 years to a Spectrum ZX81. It had Spectrum, it's 48K of memory, and by the time I went to university, I had 520K of memory, so I did all my work on an Atari 520 ST. Now, I then left university and I joined advertising. And within advertising, it wasn't all Mad Men, it wasn't all lovely old fashions, it certainly wasn't all the sex which went on in there. The one thing I found in advertising was this, in 1994, and this was my very, very first modem, a 14.4K modem. I now have 100 meg of data coming into my house. Back then, 14.4K. Anyone remember the internet from back then? This is Amazon, back in 1994. Look at it, isn't it wonderful, right? It did an amazing job because it sold books. It sold books even though it didn't look lovely, it wasn't optimized, it didn't have fantastic customer experiences. It did a job because it targeted a need for the audience. I then went on to go and work in various different advertising agencies, digital agencies. I spent 5 years working with Virgin, running Virgin Games, which was in the gambling space in that particular incarnation of it. And then I went off to found Somo 6 years ago, which became the mobile marketing agency, one of the founders of that. We soon became this, and now we're sitting here 6 years later on as being solutions for the connected world. Now, at Somo, we've done a lot of work in the gaming industry still. So we've worked with lots of different real money gambling companies, we've worked with lots of social gaming companies, we've worked with lots of mobile companies, attempting to try and understand what makes a hit and how we can get a hit, right? And that's why I'm sitting on stage here today. But what I want to talk to you about is this, right? This is an advert which was produced in 1986, I believe, for Levi's. And it is about a black sheep going the opposite direction to the herd, right? When the world zigs, zag. It was produced by an agency called BBH. It was their very, very first ad for what became their most successful client ever. And they produced fantastic ads like this. This is a Levi's advert where they got Nick Cayman to strip off in a laundrette down to his boxer shorts. And I make no excuse for putting a picture up there of Nick Cayman in his boxer shorts. As an aside, I do feel that we as an industry have a real problem in terms of how we portray women, right? This is Game of War, it's fantastic. What are you first attracted to? Wow, it's just this whole portrayal of women has to be challenged, right? And my version of this is that we need to create a simple and very, very straightforward way of being gender neutral in what we do as a gaming industry. This is another great example. This is Barbie, a computer engineer book that was withdrawn a couple of years ago. The reason it was withdrawn a couple of years ago was this. It says, "Your robot puppy is so sweet," says Skipper. "Can I play your game?" Barbie says, "I'm only creating the design ideas." Barbie says, laughing, "I'll need Stephen and Brian's help to turn it into a real game." What's up with that, right? If we want our children to explore coding, to explore gaming, we have to stop being misogynistic, right? We have to stop portraying women in this way. In particular, you know, Ada Lovelace, daughter of Byron the poet, the first computer programmer who helped notate and create algorithms for Charles Babbage's differential engine, right? She is one of the faces, she's one of the people held up in order to be the epitome of what women in computing should be. I personally think that we should be standing up for people like Zoe Quinn, who was terribly trolled and absolutely destroyed by Gamergate. So as a complete aside, please, let's change this misogynistic view of women. Back to going against the herd, right? I'm a firm believer in Oscar Wilde, right, when he says, "Talent borrows, genius steals." So I make no attempt to do anything else but to say, I have stolen from this advert and I believe that you should zig when others zag. I have now taken a couple of minutes and 30 charts in order to be able to get to the title of my presentation. You can see what's coming next, guys. Let's talk a little bit about the industry as a whole, okay, yeah? I'm going to talk specifically about mobile gaming. You will all have seen this slide. This slide says, from Flurry, that 86% of all time is spent on apps, 14% is spent in browser on a mobile device. Of that, a third is gaming, and roughly a third is social. So gaming is the one thing that seems that mobile users do more than anything else. And when you start to look at that, when you look at particularly on Apple's iOS App Store, 75% of Apple App Store revenue comes from games. In fact, you know, the number of non-gaming apps in the top grossing charts in Apple Store across the years has been very, very small. 10% of the top 10 have not, so one of the 10 is not a gaming app. That, ladies and gentlemen, is changing. If you start to look at the app market in 2014, in 2013, 10 out of 10 of the top global free apps on iOS were games. In 2014, 0 out of 10 were games. And what's the reason? The reason is that as mobile becomes the de facto platform for people around the world to connect to the internet, as by 2020, 80% of adults will have a smartphone globally, we're in a position whereby things such as social, photos, productivity are more important to people in the emerging marketplaces than gaming is. And we've also got a big problem of oversupply. So I wanted to give you an example of the App Store versus a grocery store. And this is a grocery store in the US. In a grocery store, the average grocery store has 40,000 products. On the App Store on Apple, we've got 1.3 million apps. Average number of new products coming out in the grocery store are 15,000 new products a year come into the grocery store. On the App Store, we get roughly 400,000 new apps coming in every single year. The average number of products that are bought by a family over that year is 150. So out of all of those 40,000 products, the average family will only buy 150 grocery products, right? On the App Store, the average number of apps downloaded is 22. Wow. That means to me massive oversupply. Huge amounts of different opportunities never being found by customers because customers are not downloading them, right? And that looks like on an average time, average month, the dark blue bars up here are games, the light blue bars are other apps. 13,000 games, of which every single month are not going to be found. They're not going to be played. And the only reason they will be found and they will be played is because you spend a lot of money on marketing. Supercell spending $440 million last year on marketing. King spending $500 million on marketing. And that marketing is pushing the price of install up on every single device. It is becoming more expensive to get a customer on every single platform, every single operating system. Amazon, Google Play, Amazon in particular, seeing a massive rise there in the blue. Well, it's all very, very bad news, isn't it? It seems like it's massively bad news. But I'm not here to give you bad news. I'm here to give you good news. I'm here to give you a series of strategies that I believe will lead to you creating profitable games and chasing value rather than volume. So the first thing we need to understand that in this marketplace, it's not just for games, it's across the whole of mobile, but in this marketplace, attention has become the scarcest resource. Getting an audience's attention is absolutely vital. Why? Let me give you an example of what happens every minute of every day, of every week, of every year on the internet per se. We have 204 million email messages being sent every minute. We have 72 new hours of video being uploaded to YouTube, 350,000 photos being shared on WhatsApp, 277,000 new tweets, Twitter, 216,000 new photos on Instagram. Amazon makes every minute $83,000. 48,000 apps downloaded every minute. 23,000 hours of Skype connectivity. 416,000 left or right, yes or no's on Tinder. Globally. And so on. 4 million Google searches. 2.4 million content shares on Facebook. How do you get attention when so much of this is going on? Right? There are so many other things that people can be doing. Well, no one wants to be average. Everybody wants to be awesome. And in order to be awesome, what you've got to do is you've got to get rid of averages in your business. Every time you use an average, such as a CPA, a CPI, the average number of conversions, the average number of time spent, the average amount spent, you're doing it wrong. Averages need to die. The reason they need to die was actually developed in 1890 by an Italian economist called Pareto. And what he saw from his study of farming was that 80% of goods made or produced on a farm were produced by 20% of the farms. And that meant that 80% of the revenue was being produced by 20% of the farms itself. The 80-20 rule runs across every single business. There is not a business I have worked with in the last 20 years that when you get down to it, the 80-20 rule is not absolutely right. I believe there is another rule on that as well. It's the 1 or 2% rule, 30-40%. That 1 or 2% of the audience or 1 or 2% of the goods produced will generate 30 to 40% of the revenue. And this has now become enshrined in a particular law. The law, it's a power law, right? And this is I think this is very, very funny. I got this incredibly complex diagram from the biggest source of information in the world, Wikipedia. And what that basically says is that I can apply this to Wikipedia. So Wikipedia was actually built by 4,500 people. So if we look at the number of people along this graph here and the amount of articles that they've actually produced for Wikipedia, what we see is that a very, very few number of people produce the majority of Wikipedia, and a lot of people produce very, very little of Wikipedia. So Wikipedia, the world's largest information source, was built on a power law. of 4,500 people producing it, right? And that applies for everything. So you can look at the amount of money generated in a game, right? And the amount of people that you reach who make that money. You will find over here that this 20% of people will generate 80% of your money. It works across every single metric that you look at. By looking at an average, you're skewing this, right? By looking at what's in the middle here, you're skewing it. So if we all take, if we all sit in this room and average out our salaries, right, we'll come to something, give or take, probably, 40, 50% of an average, right, of what everyone's salary will be. If Mark Zuckerberg walks into this room, right, suddenly the average will swing massively because he's worth billions. So an individual who produces a lot of revenue for you or plays your game a lot is going to swing the average completely, right? So it works for everything. It works for time, amount of things which you do, right? You see it everywhere, right? And this is not just me coming up with some mad bit of economics from the 1890s from Italy, right? In this case, this is a review of being able to see what retailers sell. And most traditional retailers can only sell a few products which go to the mass marketplace. But Chris Anderson, in his book, The Long Tail, talks about that orange part being an area where Amazon excel at, selling hundreds and hundreds of thousands of books of titles to very, very small numbers of people, right? I'm sure you've seen this as well. This is talks where Nicholas Lavelle talks about his curve, which is exactly the same power law, that the people right at one end in the 20% of Pareto's law are the revenue opportunity. The people who are in the mass market are your marketing opportunity. And Nicholas writes a book which is particularly about gaming and entertainment, where he talks about the movement from this end of the curve here, which are freeloaders, into super fans up here at the other end. Well worth a read, but it's basically the same power law. And oh, look, here we go. This is Seth Godin, another fantastic writer about the internet, talking again about power laws and talking about where profits go. So if this is reality, power laws exist, the average is dead, right? And that means that we need to start thinking about things radically different. So in the age of mass marketing, to the average, that's now dead. It's inefficient, it's too expensive. The next step is finding applications of existing products to niche groups. Finding those 1%, those 2%, those 20%. Finding those audiences which are going to create value for you, not chasing the massive amounts of volume. Please go and watch Simon Sinek's TED Talks. They are fantastic at being able to explain why niche is the new powerful aspect. I'm going to do a much worse job than that of him. But what effectively I want to do, and the whole process of this, is to talk about if you are going the same way as everyone else, if you are trying to be a Supercell or a King or someone else, you will not get there because, A, they're exploiting the law of averages and moving towards the law of the power curve. So in effect, they make all their money out of 1% of people. And B, you're not going to be able to compete on marketing cash to them, right? So I want to talk about niches and how you get to niches. That's what I mean when I talk about zigging when others zag, right? So I'm going to give you a few examples of thinking differently. Now, as you've seen from my background, I'm not a developer. My job is to look at research and look at insights and come up with opportunities that can be then created for companies and clients and brands. I haven't developed games, but I know a lot of game developers. And normally what happens along that process, and I'm being very, very generalistic here, but normally what happens is they will come up with an idea for a game before they think about coming up with the market or come up with an insight for the market. Now, what I want you to do is if you go against the grain in the marketplace and zig when others zag, is you have to come up with the market opportunity first and then come up with the game that fits that market opportunity. So let me talk about this as theory. So let me talk about operating systems to begin with. And the standard view of operating systems, right, is that we all developed for Apple in native apps, right? Now, that's the market zagging, right? You have to zig. You have to think differently. So this is my thought process when I start thinking about this, right? And I go back to the statistics. Nearly 80% of the UK population, and this is the population I know most, if you can't tell from my accent, I'm from the UK, have a smartphone. That's 40 million people in the UK, right? And when you look at the market share of that, you can see that Android has 32 million people, half the marketplace, iOS, a third of the marketplace, and then you look at Windows Phone. Windows Phone has 10% of the marketplace. That's 4 million people. Now that's a big audience, that's a big niche. I'm thinking, that's interesting, because if everyone else is out here with hundreds of thousands of apps aimed in Android, hundreds of thousands of apps aimed at iOS, hundreds of apps on Windows Phone, the competition isn't as much. So I think, well, let's explore Windows Phone a little bit and see what's happening here. This is the age breakdown of Windows Phone, right? So this is, in the blue bars are the average smartphone owner age, in the yellow bars are the Microsoft smartphone owner age, and in the green bars are those people who play games on Microsoft Windows Phone in the UK, right? Unsurprisingly, you look at that stat there and look at the average Microsoft smartphone owner, and they're 55 plus, an older audience. But when you start to look at who's playing games on the device, and it's the same proportion of people who play games on a Microsoft phone as they play on an Android phone or play on an iOS phone, you've got a big group here in the 13 to 17-year-old area. Well, that's interesting because that's probably driven by Xbox and Xbox Live and integration happening there. And you've got a big group here in the middle-aged area, and when you start to look into that, you realize it is women who are driving that in terms of the gaming usage and casual games. So I can start to say, okay, if I want to target a youth audience or if I want to target a middle-aged audience, I've got the opportunity to be able to do this because the data's led me to this conclusion that Microsoft Windows users use games, but they don't necessarily, right, they don't necessarily do that in a way that everyone else does. Because when you start to look at what people do on Microsoft Windows Phone and what games work, what they say they play, what's really interesting is that music and rhythm games are the #1 thing that over-index. That is that more people play music and rhythm games on Microsoft Windows Phone than any other form of game. What's also really interesting there, just as we talk about freemium versus paid, is that paid racing games also over-index. So with that information, I might think that I might create a music and rhythm game aimed at those middle-aged audience of gamers on Microsoft Windows Phone because the competition isn't as large. I'm going after a niche which has been backed up by data and insight. That's what I'm looking at. In other words, what I'm doing is I'm going through data and I'm trying to pan for gold to find the information that will allow me to be able to make an informed business decision of whether there is a market and what I then put into that market and then how I can exploit that market in terms of pricing and in terms of revenue. So let's talk a little bit more. Let's talk about format for a minute, okay, yeah. Because I think this is really, really interesting because last year something happened which was, so 18 months ago something happened that this came out, that this very, very simple game that was ultra addictive came out. Of course, it was taken off very quickly, had clones everywhere, wasn't particularly well monetized, but we'll go around that. But it created almost a completely new genre. It appealed to people who are picking up their phone 250 times a day and want not 5 minutes, not 2 minutes of fun, but probably 20 seconds of fun. It literally was bang, bang, oh. Well, anyway, if you were any good at it, it was only 20 seconds of fun. And this was about an insight that they had about creating something that was incredibly difficult, incredibly addictive, but something that hit a very, very small, short attention span. I'd like to think that the insight they got from that was around things such as Instagram. So Instagram video is 15 seconds, or Twitter's Vine, which is 7 seconds. We're getting to a point where attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, so why not create a format that absolutely exploits that for people? And then, of course, we had lots of other formats coming out in the same type of aspect of this, Crossy Road, Stick Ninjas, all these guys. The super casual market was created, right? Because it was fulfilling a basic human need for not give me 10 minutes, not give me half an hour, not give me 1 minute, give me 20 seconds of fun. Seems to be doing quite well in the charts, right? Seems to be doing excellently. All of these type of games, this one at the bottom, which is absolutely addictive for me, and I go on it probably 30 times a day, but only for a couple of 20 seconds, 30 seconds at a time. It's been downloaded, it's being played. It's completely changed the charts as to what it would be done. And I loved when Mashable talked about what they wanted to see on new devices. On the Apple Watch, actually, Flappy Bird would be brilliant. Because on the Apple Watch, Apple don't want you to be in a situation of doing anything that takes more than 5 seconds. Because it's that. Gone. So that's about having an insight into human behavior of how they use mobiles, which creates a whole new genre. So let's talk about devices. Let's talk about the Apple Watch. Now, I've been playing around with the Apple Watch. I'm a bit meh about it, right? I'm not sure it's going to radically change the world. The point is that the Apple Watch sold more product before it went on sale than any other watch had, which was launched the 2 years before it. It outsold the Samsung Galaxy Gear. It outsold the Pebble. It outsold the Moto. It defines the market. Its projections, depending on who you believe, and this is everyone from Morgan Stanley to Goldman Sachs, who make or break company share prices, they're going to sell somewhere between 8 and 42 million, right? If they sell 8 million, that is 3 million more than the iPhone sold when it first launched. The first year of the iPhone, they sold 5 million. If it sells somewhere in the middle of that number, right, it will sell the same. If it sells around 20 million, it will sell as many as the iPad sold when it was first launched. This is a major device launch with millions and millions of people buying it. Looks like an opportunity, doesn't it? Looks like a niche. Doesn't look mass market, doesn't look volume, but looks interesting to experiment on. So I had a look and said, so what are the games on there? And I got really excited because one of my favorite games, Trivia Crack, was on there. And then I played it on the watch and I was like, oh, God, it's just a port of the game on my phone on my watch. And it's not a very good port. Why do you think that this device, which fundamentally changes my interactions that I have, because I'm doing that in 5 seconds, that I'm going to do something that I can do on my phone? Why do you think you can port something across? That's the wrong way of thinking. There are, however, people who are doing the right way of thinking. So this is a game called Spy Watch, which takes you into an immersive fantasy world whereby you are basically being an intelligence agent and you have different messages coming into you at different times during the day where you make instant decisions. I was collecting intel on the attack, but someone's tailing me. What should I do? Take him out or run away? What do you do? Oh, it's choose your own adventure. It's fighting fantasy books, right? And then you've got other really clever games coming out. This one's called Lifeline. Lifeline, again for your watch, it's again about messaging coming through to you, but this time it's about helping someone who is lost in space, an astronaut lost in space. And you're helping them. And why that's really interesting is because you suddenly get this emotional bond to somebody who you don't even know, which is just a computer, because you're getting messages from them the whole time. That's really powerful because it affects you emotionally. And Lifeline seems to have done very, very well. It's really interestingly, it's not a freemium game. You have to pay hard-earned money for it. That's an unusual situation. That's going against the grain. B, it seems to have done incredibly well in terms of hitting the gaming ranks. Why? Because it was first to device, quite clearly. But I think it's because it's looked at how people will interact with this particular device, and it's come up with a really interesting way of doing that, a way of engaging people. It's thought, it's zigged when everyone else, like Trivia Crack, is zagging. And I think the device gives you a massive number of opportunities. There is this point on the device where you can send someone your heartbeat. Yeah, you can doodle on it, but you can also send someone your heartbeat. You can also tap them. Wow, what a fantastic new gesture to play around with. There's got to be some interesting games to be played around with on that, right? There's got to be some really interesting opportunities to think about utilizing this new technology, this new interface, this new gesticular thing. And the other thing about the Apple Watch is it's really, really, really good at voice. It's as good as Siri is, because it runs from Siri, but if I get a phone call, I can talk back to it. But if I get a text message, I can just dictate back the text message and go with that. Or if I want to find some information out, I can just ask my Apple Watch. Right? So voice is becoming a new way of interacting. So instead of on this 1.5-inch screen thinking about what graphics we put on and what touch we do on that basis, maybe we should start thinking about games controlled by voice. Again, zig when others zag. This is not just about smartwatches, though, because we are now entering the fourth world, the fourth era, if you like, of computing. We had the mainframe era, with all those big computers, for businesses and the likes. We then had the personal PC era. We're now firmly in the mobile era with smartphones and tablets. And we're now entering the connected devices arena. And the connected devices means any object that originally was dumb being connected with a sensor and with internet connectivity to make it smart, to make it talk back. And I see there being sort of three very clear responses to that from the mobile perspective. The first is that we will spend a lot of our time looking at what happens when we're doing this. Right? What happens on the device? It's me and the device, the screen, I'm like this, right? As soon as we start to recognize that we can take this device and it can interact with the real world, that becomes interesting. Location, augmented reality, triggering activity, right? That becomes an interesting way because we stop having the device like this and our eyes are like this, and we start holding the device up and start interacting with the world. And then the third aspect of this is that we will move towards the mobile phone becoming the remote control for all of these connected devices. You cannot have an Apple Watch without having an iPhone. It needs to have that. It's a dumb object. Android phones, you can run apps on the Android phone without even having, the Android Watch, without having the phone there. But with Apple, you need the phone there. And these connected devices, in terms of retail, in terms of cars, health, homes, cities, are going to start producing loads and loads of interesting data. So I think what's interesting to think, when you're thinking about zigging and zagging, you start thinking about what does the connected car mean? What does the data from the connected car mean? How do I create a gamified experience for that? Not for the driver, but maybe for the passengers. What does the connected home mean? What does having my fridge connected mean? Or my washing machine connected? How can I make that experience enjoyable, more interesting, taking the data out of there? You can start to see where I'm going with that. What happens when I start to get a position of having real 3D virtual worlds coming to my house through things like Oculus? The cost of Oculus, through things like Samsung Gear and everything, even through Google Card, is coming down and down and down. What happens? These are all devices that we're going to be using. So let's not stick ourselves just purely on doing games which are me to the device, to the screen here. Let's think about these other opportunities. Okay, halfway done. 15 minutes left. Proceed. Platform now. This is a very clever man here. This man is Fred Wilson from Union Square Ventures. He says the social media phase of the internet has ended. Messaging is the new social media. Now, this he said back in Christmas, and he was looking at these stats. These stats, which were released a couple of weeks ago, show that the big four social networks and the big four messaging apps, the number of messaging apps, those big four messaging apps have now come to the same number of users as the big four social networks. So let's just contextualize this, yeah? Let's just contextualize the fact that Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, they're the big four social networks, right? Now have the same number of users as WhatsApp, Messenger, WeChat, and Viber. And it looks like the growth of these messaging platforms will far exceed the growth of the social networks. Now, we all know how interesting Facebook was as a platform for gaming in the very, very early days. What's interesting with these guys is that they are effectively running very, very closed systems when it comes to gaming. You know, WhatsApp doesn't take games, Facebook doesn't take games, WeChat only takes games which Tencent and the like will produce. Viber only has 3 games on there. So let's just look at the second tier of messaging apps. And you start to get to some very interesting things. So we're talking about audiences in the hundreds of millions on these second tier of apps. So Line, quite clearly, I think, should go into the first tier of apps. But Kik, which is HTML5, 200 million registered users. Tango, 280 million registered users. Kakao Talk, 152 million registered users. These are massive, massive audiences. If you just pick this one platform and concentrate on it and think about what you can do on that single platform, you are going to have success, because it is not about porting what works in the App Store or what works on Facebook or what works on Facebook mobile into these messaging platforms. It is about understanding the behaviors and creating something that is going to be unique to their particular feature set. Zigging when others zag. And that's quite clear, because people like Tango are actively asking for developers to come out and develop something for them which is unique to their particular feature set, and they're going to pay you to do it, because they're in an arms race against the other messaging platforms, and they want killer applications. So if I'm a developer, I've got to be thinking, whoa, that looks interesting. And then, of course, the big news which happened a couple of days ago was that games, according to The Verge, so let's take this with a pinch of salt, but it came from The Information, which is a much better, reliable source, that games may be coming to Facebook Messenger. The first round of things that Facebook did with Messenger was all about creating more value around the message itself. Now they want to monetize with games. Very, very interesting. If you think about working with an individual platform and focus on doing something unique for that platform, you have a large enough audience to be able to really develop some scale within that. Zig and zag. Talk very quickly, 2 more, about local and global. This always interests me, is that when you look at the apps or game apps by language, English is by far, 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 far and away the largest opportunity there. Obviously, Chinese, Japanese, very important there. Korean, obviously important for those particular marketplaces. You can't do business without having local language on that basis. But I started to think about this and started to look at it. So I looked at Polish apps. So this is, according to Localized Direct, is that there's 188 apps in the App Store, Apple iOS App Store, which are in Polish. That doesn't seem very, very many. In fact, when you start to look at the population of Poland, quite clearly we're at 38.5 million people. When you start to look at the population of Poland of people who live abroad, the Poles that live abroad that speaks Polish, you can add at least another 20 million onto that. And yet I've got 188 games in Polish. That doesn't sound right to me at all. So going back to my time at Virgin, I started to think, okay, so if I'm going to write a game specifically for a Polish audience, what am I going to do? So I went and had a look on the internet, and I started thinking, okay, let's think about card games. Now, I have no idea whether any of these card games are popular in Poland. But the point is, you will, because you're local. You understand. In your countries, you'll understand what people play, what they don't play. You have the insight already. But you think that insight is not worthwhile, because if only 100,000 or 200,000 or 1 million people play that game, it's not big, it's not huge, it's not Clash of Clans. So I had a look at that, and I picked one at random, Mazurka. Is that a popular game in Poland? Then probably not then. But there is only one app for it. There's only one app for that game. And it seems to have 3,500 reviews on the Android App Store. So I reckon that's pretty good, assuming that only probably 5% of people ever review a game. I reckon that shows that game's doing quite well at the moment. So when you think about local, you think about what affects you and your audience in your countries, in your cities. you can start to see how focusing in on that can create opportunities. Because it's not just an opportunity around your country, it's also an opportunity about the people who speak your language around the world. So that's how I think about local and global. Right, serious. I don't know if anyone remembers this. In 1999, the Search for Extraterrestrial Life, SETI, launched a screensaver. And that screensaver basically, in the background, whilst your computer was running on screensaver, would crunch the data coming from SETI's radio telescopes in order to be able to look for unusual patterns of contact from extraterrestrial life. It is one of the first examples of distributed computing, right? But it was a screensaver, and all you could see was things going up and down, and it wasn't that interesting, right? You move that into what's happening today, that in the UK, cancer research are using the same distributed methodology. So your mobile phone, whilst playing this game, Genes in Space, is crunching data to help solve the cancer and cure cancer. Now, I reckon that is a really appealing opportunity to build games upon, helping mankind whilst playing. It might not appeal to everybody, but remember, we're not interested in everyone, are we? We're interested in that 1 or 2%, those people who regularly give to charity, who want to make a difference in the world. Now, the cancer research team, the game, I've played it, it's not great. So what they've recognized is they shouldn't be producing games themselves. They should be providing the opportunity for the distributed computing part of the game to go into anyone else's game. And then you've got a differentiation. If you put that in your game, if you work on that basis, you have the ability to be able to start to talk about it in marketing in a very, very different way. I mean, another example of that is, I think, what's going to happen with Bitcoin. I don't think that our mobiles are ever going to be powerful enough to be able to mine in the same way as a distributed array setup of PCs is, but there are clever people thinking about this. This is Fitcoin. Fitcoin rewards you with Bitcoin based on the data that you produce from your devices, your fitness devices. So in other words, it's using that data, and behind that data, which is being collected, it's running its own Bitcoin mining data. Very interested. Probably more egotistical and probably more personal than, the idea about solving cancer and curing cancer. But I just wondered, knowing how popular Minecraft is, how much could we do with Minecraft if we put Bitcoin? How could we get our teenagers and our kids working for us, earning Bitcoins, if we put it in behind there? Maybe that's just me being evil, I don't know. Last one, guys, habits. We're talking about fitness, right? Fitness is one of the biggest habits which we do with our mobiles. And if you look at the opportunity within fitness, the first stage of fitness wearables was all about, the individual wearable, the Jawbones, the Fitbits, all smart watches. Apple Watch will have fitness in there, and we'll get to having probably embeddable wearables in the next couple of years, which will look at this. And for me, that becomes a really interesting behavioral habit. Upwards of 25% of people have a fitness app. Upwards of 10% of US citizens have a fitness band, right? That becomes another audience, another niche that I can start to talk to, right? And it's only going up, it's only growing. So I had a look around and I said, well, okay, what games are there which I can look about for fitness? And I came across Zombies Run. Now, Zombies Run is not available in the App Store under the Games section. It's available under the Health and Fitness section. But it is essentially a game. The whole principle of Zombies Run is that you rebuild your civilization whilst you're out running, and you are chased by zombies. You have to find things whilst you run. It's an amazing experience. It makes my runs so much more interesting. It was put on Kickstarter, and it had 3,500 people backing it. So they already had an audience before they'd even created the game. That's a really clever idea about niche and about zigging with a zag, right? If you look at it today, V1 came out in 2012. It's done over 1 million sales. It's again a pay-to-play, not a freemium app. $4. It was originally launched $8. #1 grossing in health and fitness, yeah? And it's only just moved to freemium now because it's reached an audience scale of 1 million that it's probably declining on its new version. in terms of getting new people in there. But it's already reached 1 million people. It's already averaged, even at $4, right? That's $4 million of sales, and take off Apple's cut on that, so I'm, you know, whatever, 2.8 million or whatever coming in sales coming off the back of that. Because I'm creating a habit, right? I'm creating and improving a habit. And we can start to see other people coming on this fitness thing. So there's a very interesting game called Run an Empire, which is coming out. Basically, again, Kickstarter, again. So in this case, 2,000 people to go and create 23,000 quid to get the game off the ground. You join a team and control territory in your local area through your runs. So it looks something like that. Brilliant. You know, that's gamifying my run. That's creating something, which then, again, that will be a paid game. Really interesting concept here, something called Super Better. Super Better is created by Jane McGonigal. When she had a concussion injury, she wanted to do something that would keep her better and fitter and give her goals moving forward. It's a game. It's game theory, right? And Jane talks about the fact that instead of providing gamers with better and more immersive alternatives to reality, I want for all of us to become responsible providing the world with a better and more immersive reality. In other words, take the game out of the screen and make it applicable to my life. I think this is really, really powerful. Data that is produced gives us great opportunity to create games around that. I'm sure you all saw last couple of months ago when Pac-Man took over the New York streets on Google Maps. That was a really interesting sort of Easter egg, but that actually comes out of real play. So New York University used to do live action Pac-Man on Manhattan streets. That's an urban game that already exists, right? Strava is fantastic. There's a great thing on Strava at the moment where you create pictures of through Strava and post them up. That's a really interesting game they're doing themselves. So this is a chicken in San Francisco. This is a bike in England, you know? And it seems to me that with the increasing opportunity with the fitness trackers and everything like this, you've suddenly got a point whereby you've got a huge audience which you could start to disrupt. How boring is the gym, right? But 50 million people are gym members in the States, 7.5 million people are gym members in the UK. Isn't that a big enough audience for me to be able to go and create a game that somehow disrupts what the whole gym experience actually is? It's again a niche which we can go after. It ain't going to be Clash of the Clans, right? One more thing, taking from Apple, right? Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. This isn't easy, right? Going after niches. You have to get out of your heads the principle of reaching millions upon millions of people and being the next Supercell or King. What you can do is you can provide really useful, profitable applications for people to fill a particular need and a niche. Now that's hard work, but I think it's absolutely and utterly the way we have to move as an industry. So it's over. It's over, guys. Thank you very much indeed, and I'm going to say, please zig when others zag.
Whoa! Thank you very much. Honestly, like, I will need to rewatch it again because it was full of inspirations. Does anyone have any questions, comments? This is a great opportunity to ask. Do I see
Go
any?
and eat.
Oh, there is one question. Please come here because I don't want to.
Can you share your favorite services with market data? Who is winning? Who is selling? Where to find market data?
Sorry, who's selling and who's winning?
Your favorite services you use to find market data.
So, Google. I kid you not. JFGI. Just Google it. There is more PR and more free data out there than you begin to imagine. Right? Every place, so every town, big capital city, will also have a big library. In London, we have the British Library. I can join that for free, and I can look at all the market research which they hold on the back there. You don't need to have ComScore, But you know what? Sitting when ComScore present to you, you can get the data out of those presentations. What you're looking for are little insights, things that make you go, hold on a minute, if that. The fitness data, everything on that, all the data on that was Googled, bar the ComScore data right at the start on Microsoft Windows. So it was all free.
Okay.